We are running hard of battle today. And we are running hard of battle because we need to develop some new bot methods for higher level play. We've been practicing a little more recently, definitely realizing that we have other bots that are more specific to things, but a lot of the new characters particularly have very small requirements, very fiddly requirements that we can build up through bot training, but the bots that we have, the ones that are specialized for helping players at lower levels, bronze and silver, while they do a good job of teaching the main things of a character or the main parts of a matchup, only a few of them do a good job of making sure you learn how to do specific executional things or get really tight reactions. And so, while we're going through some of them, more likely we're going to be watching the levels of play and characters we see at the diamond level and higher, because honestly Omni Rabbit often ends up fighting people higher than diamond. And while Omni Rabbit normally has a lot of these skills already due to, you know, places he hangs out, practice he gets, we are not always able to watch that and do the analysis. And especially lately, obviously with the pandemic going on, that has been reduced even further.
You are currently ranked in the top 20,000 in the world.
So since we haven't actually had a chance to do this type of analysis in a long time, we're doing this on a Saturday because this just happens to be the time where we're all available for it. There will be spotting, but it will follow the same rules as always. Advice will only be given in between rounds. It may be a little bit out of sync because I am watching this via watching the stream itself. So we have an Ultimate Grandmaster Ed to worry about now. There's not a whole lot I generally have to say for Omni Rabbit in this matchup, as Ed players at this level have a specific idea of how to play Ed that doesn't match most people's perceptions at all, where most people is basically everyone lower than this.
Round 2. Fight.
And as he's not really a popular character, he's a little hard to deal with in that regard. Using his V skill too, there's some other stuff you have to look out for. But mainly, this is about the players' mindsets versus each other, so it's not as likely that I'll have a lot to say. Ed is not, however, one of the characters that we're really considering for this in the matchups. As they get higher level skills, most Ed mains just get better at the same things that Edbot already does, or pressure, more or less. Pressure, footsies, reading stuff, the stuff that's really important for high level play, but without much change in their personal capability to play Ed.
Final round. Fight.
And by that I mean there's no new specific Ed combos, not very many specific setups that you can't see at lower levels. That sort of thing. OmniRabbit personally is likely to be working on things like becoming frustrated, or going in when it's not necessary, or overcommitting on an opponent that probably has enough resources to make a kill. Things we talk about in our streams but don't necessarily bring up a lot outside of those, because they're not really things you learn from bots in the first place. They're emotional things.
You lose.
Oh, that's disappointing. That was fun.
One thing that is likely to help in that sort of matchup is the specific way that Ed players respond when they're forced to play corner guard slowly. So, just as a general thing, remember that if you are being corner guarded by an Ed player, and you have any option to jump forward, you might also want to jump backwards some of the time, or neutral jump, if they are wiggling out of your range, because it can actually be difficult to get a lot of damage on you when you do this. It depends on your character's jump arcs and whether or not you have anything whatsoever that confuses them. But it's not a terrible thing to at least consider because of the way Ed goes for pressure once the opponent is cornered. It's because he has such a good dash, because he has such good setups for things, you're going to have to think of him a lot like Rashid, where when he's just barely minus or sort of plus, but doesn't think you're going to stop blocking, the answer is usually to jump instead of doing anything else. And normally you end up jumping backward or jumping neutral because of just a weird interaction that Psycho Upper has with those positionings. Whereas if you jump over his head, it often autocorrects, or Ed just waits longer and presses the button anyway without having to worry about that much in terms of execution, and you still get uppercut. So it's not quite a shenanigan, but you'd probably only want to pick it once in every 5-10 times. But never doing it leaves you a little bit predictable and is likely to get you thrown.
Final round. Fight.
This type of Bison player is one of the toughest for Laura to deal with, because she has to make a decision of whether or not to block or jump at a specific point in neutral, usually after being hit once and maybe twice. Of course, if she continues to block, Bison tends to waste a lot of energy moving around and not get very much off of it other than a ton of white health damage. But they do have the options to do certain things, and if she doesn't jump ever, they will just keep on doing them more or less forever.
Fight.
Thankfully, Bison doesn't have a whole lot of really devastating options from the positions that we're talking about. He's usually doing stand moves and so on. It's a bit of a problem, but not like crippling. Your general concern is when you're close to the corner, being corner guarded in the jump is a lot rougher than doing it mid-screen. Depending on Bison's position, he'll often get crossed up if he decides to go for anything other than a defensive technique.
Round 2.
And therefore, Laura doesn't have to care as much. She'll get hit by stand heavy punch sometimes, and depending on her jump art, she'll get hit by things like Bison's Psycho Burst or even EX Inferno, but these are still not really things that intimidate Laura out of doing her stuff. Bison's relatively slower dashes also mean it's a little bit easier to control neutral by occasionally, very occasionally jumping. But it's only really necessary against this type of Bison, the type that hits buttons and basically is never minus enough or close enough, one of the two, to actually be counterattacked and nearly never whiffs any buttons. This is often dealt with by the EX Scissor Kick. It helps keep that situation when things are not where Bison wants them to be anymore. It's a good way to get in without losing advantage and keep that pressure on that really keeps people frustrated with the way that Bison play of this style works. Since view reversal does not help as much in most cases, you're not really going to end up using it, but at the same time, you don't often end up with a reason to use your view meter for anything else either, because they basically never give you the option to. It is often good to save your V reversal for when you're cornered or about to be cornered, because it's a little bit more obvious that you're going to V reversal out once you've been cornered for a while. But it can, at least, take people by surprise when you're not quite to the corner yet, but you're thinking it will happen, or you just prefer to be more mid-screen than you were. So you V-reversal then. Remember that at this level of play, a lot of it is about positioning and psychology. Most people can do most of their combos and other tricks well enough at this level for it to not come up. The neutral jump is also a good way to save yourself from some of Bison's other shenanigans, and depending on the timing and whether or not they're staggering their options, it will even get you out of the scissor kick. It's similar to a Kareen style of play. If the opponent is basically never going to let you hit any buttons without having to deal with theirs, then neutral jump and the problem will be resolved at least somewhat.
Oh, I didn't know that would work. I just thought he was gonna throw me. Okay.
You win.
I guess I grabbed the last frame of the dash or something. Neat. That guy was really good. He didn't autopilot his pressure at all. Very interesting.
That was still within the realm of what our Bison bot, our Dictator bot, is able to do. While it is obviously built to spend a lot more time using head stomp and related things, all of the tools you saw used, the bot will use in approximately the same spaces. So in terms of, was there anything in there that needed to be learned to be reacted to? There's no need to change the Bison bot for that purpose. You could, of course, use certain things to reduce the amount of actual head stomp it does in order to get more grounded stuff, but if you look carefully at what the player used and what they spent their time doing, you're really just changing a little bit of it. And honestly, as you go up in ranks, when you start to be able to handle people and win more, there is a certain, let's say, plateau where the solution of your opponent to this is going to be to head stomp more, because they haven't gotten used to the idea that they won't win by doing so. We're probably back to the Ed. Almost certainly the same Ed.
You are currently ranked in
The other thing that Lara can do against Ed, no, it's not the same Ed, but let's see if there is a specific actual additional thing that happens. The other thing Lara can do against Ed is take advantage of the fact that Ed's Psycho Spark, if chosen to be used as a mid-range zoning tool, loses to nearly everything in this game. So she can fight him same way she fights Balrog fairly often. If she thinks he's going to zone, just hit max range, stand heavy punch, and hope that it doesn't get too badly punished, because Ed doesn't have terribly good punishes for it anyway. The waste potential we see here is pretty good. And it is true that our Edbot doesn't really do this, but the main reason Edbot doesn't do this is because it's not a specifically useful tactic against most characters. It's decent against Lara because it has to do with the way that Lara wants to throw clap when she has time to do so, and whether or not she thinks she can advance. But if you are the sort of player that will let your opponent whiff that fake dash punch and not actually do it from that position consistently, then it makes no difference really. You see again there the back jump kick, which again isn't really about when you're already in the corner per se, but it can be, because Ed doesn't like to corner guard from the position that most other characters do. He doesn't have a lot of great options for it, meaning you're more likely to get that back jump longest possible kick to clip one of his buttons or clip one of his approaches. The problem is always going to be that you can't really confirm off that unless you've practiced on, say, Sagatbot for a while. If you find that your character can't confirm at all, one good option is to just immediately forward jump again. This is particularly useful in the corner because if you succeed at it, it will end up with Ed cornered, and Ed isn't easy to corner guard, but he's not particularly super strong at it either.
Final round. Fight.
That was a rough decision to have to make whether or not to E at sunset there.
Ah. I'm surprised the overhead whip. I thought that would catch the backdash, but Ed's backdash
What
is
is
really
Ed?
good. So, nope. He just dodged out of the way. It happens.
Our Edbot does contain a decent amount of backdash for this reason, but it may be difficult to actually get Ed to backdash when fighting him, as you have to have a certain amount of performance against the bot's actual goals in order to cause the rhythm
Round one.
to shift the inputs such that the first input, because the backdash is a hidden input, the first input that it is contained in doesn't happen. It is a very common thing to actually be executed by Edbot. This is another meter watching heavy match because a lot of Ed fighting is about understanding, does Ed have enough meter to make me stop doing this? Despite having a 3-frame move, this character isn't really built to stop people from pressuring. This is more so because of something else that's harder to understand about this game and fighting games in general. Where your opponent begins their counter pressure from affects how effective your defense is. Basically, your opponent's pushback is where you get a lot of your defense. If they push you back really far, when you go to start your combo to counter pressure them, let's say, they did a safe move, but it's now your turn, you are advantaged, you are now hitting buttons. How good your pressure is, your pressure options might depend on how far away they were when their safe move hit. And Ed, honestly, isn't a character who's so great at this. He doesn't tend to end up at a position where the opponent has a good reason to counterattack. But when he does, he's almost always so close that their longer strings will work and not push him out to the point where his own stuff is particularly misleading. He also doesn't have many good pull hitbox back stuff. So the fact that he has the good backdash has to be carefully utilized through that, realizing that, oh, my opponent is counterattacking, but I wasn't actually that close to them, so I can backdash. This is also why you might not always want to use Ed's quick ability to walk forward, stagger, and similar in close range. Because if you feel as if your opponent is going to keep blocking, you might be able to get the throw, but you'll end up in some bad situations nonetheless.
Round 2. Fight.
While OmniRabbit has more or less picked up on the flows in which this player uses Psycho Upper, is particularly E at Psycho Upper, it's never that simple at this level. You don't just go, well, my opponent does E at Psycho Upper out of pressure a lot. It's not ever that they're just doing that. One way to solve it is to try to make the read, but while this is obviously sometimes the best way if you feel as if you've really got your opponent, you know you're under their skin or something, but before then you have to be a little more technical about it usually. Specifically, figure out whether or not you're in a bad position for getting hit with the move. Because there are definitely positions in which it would be bad to get hit with the move, but other positions where it's just, I guess.
That's 2 missed sways, it happens. There was absolutely no reason not to sway after the jump on the corner, so. The neutral flow was fine, I just needed to actually execute on the tool that let me capitalize on it.
That is another thing that you can fortunately just train with EdBot. By changing the settings and watching how much meter Ed has, and the fact that basically EdBot doesn't use EX meter that much and often is just for EX Psycho Upper, you cannot learn when the bot will do it, which is the point I'm making. You're not really trying to learn that. You're trying to watch for, am I in a bad situation on the screen with my own meter? Any situation where me getting hit by this move, because please note that EX Psycho Upper gives Ed a good knockdown, he gets pressure from the move. If you don't have a way to defend against that pressure, sometimes you will need to go for the bait even if you don't necessarily think that your opponent is going to use the move. And you can take advantage of the fact that, once again, Ed doesn't do that well when he's just come out of your strings. When you have had control of how far Ed is away from you, he's a slightly weaker character as a whole. An opponent that walks forward and makes perfect use of this is often dangerous, but they usually have to hit like stand heavy punch or heavy kick or something for this to work, because otherwise most characters will just backdash out. It's really complicated, but it's enough to remember that you have the options and the character's strengths are only shown in particular situations, which you can at least partially avoid. Ken has a lot of similar interactions with Lara. Ken has a lot of similar interactions with a lot of people, honestly. Because the more time you spend thinking, is now a good time to go for this, or is Ken just going to uppercut me? The better and more effective overall you're likely to be. A situation in which Ken has 2 meter and you're near the corner, for example, is not often a great situation to be risking going for full pressure, especially since your focus should often be to get out of the corner in the first place. Lara does have the option just shown, specifically E at sunset, which will give her often enough of a life lead to not be too worried about the whole thing. But do remember that when you are doing anything to counter zone Ken, unlike most other characters, Ken players are trying to get to you. Counter zoning Ken is about understanding that he's using those fireballs not as a way to keep you away from him, but as a way to keep you quiet until he can get to you.
Round 2. Fight.
It also of course helps that if you have to block them, you're the one that has to deal with Ken constantly getting more meter than you. Characters that have good counter zoning that specifically counters the fireball are better off in general, but please note that you, again, have to watch out for the Ken player's mindset at the time. Because Ken doesn't need a lot to function. He actually needs his meter and resources to get damage, but as a character, there are some characters in this game where people will say, well, this character has drastically reduced options without meter, for example. Ken, not so much. Ken just functions basically the same all of the time.
Final round. Fight.
It's that consistency that causes particular players to continue to play the character, even though by many standards he's not really that great. Because he's consistent, he's not generally overwhelming constantly. He does the same thing almost all the time, and then occasionally does something explosive. If you're good at timing the explosive part, you get a big reward. Lara is a similar character to this as well, but she tends to be more so able to convert good situations into remarkably good situations, whereas Ken lacks this specific ability. Ken often has to recreate the same good situation over and over.
You win.
That is not going to work again.
Fortunately, it was still probably the correct decision to make because the Ken player had just used all of the meter. They had specifically made it possible for dash up something based on or that sort of movement to work. And you have to pay attention to this sort of thing as well.
Fight.
Learning when you're only going to get one chance to do something and therefore you absolutely should do it is hard. Mainly because when it doesn't work, the only thing you get out of that is information. You've learned against this particular player in this particular situation, for whatever reason, they don't fall for this, or didn't fall for this. Maybe they're freaked out. It's not always possible to know why a thing went a certain way, because you don't know what was in the opposing player's head. But if you picked up on other aspects of their game plan, and things have ended up really close, you're better off not necessarily going for the kill and hoping it works. Even though it is true to say that you're both guessing at that moment,
Round 2.
the little bit of information you can gather by going based on some theory you have, and not just, oh wait, maybe I can get a kill, can definitely help you in later matches. And as you get better and better at this game, you should start to expect the later matches as a concept. Any game in the current meta of fighting games that you get good enough at, is a high chance that your winners and high level matches are going to end in top 4, top 8, and you are playing 3 out of 5. And 3 out of 5 is a really different beast when it comes to this. It's true that most of the time, the player that wins 2 matches in a row carries on to win it all. But there's a specific psychological reason for that too. It's because whatever the loser learned from their loss in the first set is often what makes them able to win the second and move on from there.
You lose.
At that level of play, the often interaction you will see is someone going, okay, I've learned something, I'm going to try to use it. And if the other player manages to keep up regardless of this, or outright get ahead or think faster, let's say,
Round 1.
and counter the expectation of the other's counter, then it's hard psychologically to get through that and pick yourself up and go, okay, well, I definitely know what to do now. And even if it was just luck, for example, luck is enough sometimes to get you through, because the third round still has to happen in more or less the same way. Fortunately for OmniRabbit, Laura is a character that doesn't respect life leads.
Round 2. Fight.
She's often called a momentum character, but that's not strictly the reason why this happens. Laura doesn't respect life leads because Laura has strong, really strong conversions and counter tools against nearly everything in the game. With the exception of extremely good footsies. She has some tool that counters basically everything else. Meaning that if you think you have her on the ropes, you're almost always wrong. The player is always capable of pulling out or doing something that you were not expecting or didn't think was going to hit you, and from there converting a situation. And she can repeat this because she just has options for nearly everything you could think of to do. There's no point at which you go, okay, I've got the life lead, now I just need to X. Whereas for other characters, you can definitely say that, especially for some of the zoners in the game. I have a life lead of, let's say, 25%, 30%. We're about equal in meter. I just have to X. And that goes for both the zoning side and the counter zoning side. The player decides, okay, I know enough of this matchup, I know enough of your capabilities that you can't do certain things. In fact, this is one of the tiny differences between Laura and Mika. Mika doesn't have a counter tool for as many things. She very much is a momentum character because she will find a way to hurt you from many situations if you keep on defending. But if you found a way to keep her from getting into any of her positions, she can't just do what Laura does and definitely get through. we have definitely considered working on advanced versions of both Ryu and Kenbot. And honestly, it's not that difficult. There's simply a matter of changing some of their post-Hadoken attacks from jumps to something else. Once you have got your anti-airs down, feel free to experiment and let us know how it goes. But in general, we find that this is probably going to be personal or custom because what they do against different characters differs. You can already see the difference here though. Ryu is generally trying to throw fireballs, not to come forward, but to maintain a particular space, which makes a tactic that works well on Ryu not at all effective on Ken for Laura. Generally, basically throwing out clap, particularly the specifically medium clap, depending on the Ryu, but it can be heavy, with the sole purpose of setting up a positioning on the screen where Ryu wants to do something that he can't get away with. That clap alone makes Ryu's offense quite difficult, because reacting to it to recognize a clap is happening, and therefore I should jump, really sets you up to be baited into a lot of things.
Round 2.
It's one of those parts of the match that you know theoretically could work, but both players also know, especially at Diamond Tier, this is going to lead this match down a path that I don't want, or in the case of Laura, a path that Laura does want. Specifically, Laura's anti-airs against Ryu are generally so good that Ryu doesn't want to bring the match to the point where he has to be relying on jumping perfectly. Unfortunately for Ryu, most of his good fake fireballs
Final round.
or ways of making
Fight.
a player think he wants to throw a fireball don't work well on Omni Rabbit specifically because you just sway. You sway at that range, and if you see Ryu do anything, all of the moves Ryu uses recover almost just tiny amounts too slow, and you just have to move forward with the sway and move into position. Meaning that this is really going to be about how well this player can actually zone. Fortunately, Laura doesn't really get a lot of chance to build up V-meter in this matchup, and often has to activate V-trigger raw, because Ryu doesn't really give her a chance to do things the other way, and even if he does, it doesn't often lead to her having much advantage. If you're ready enough for it, you can take at least 1 or 2 risks when Laura has gone for that cancel.
Oh, okay.
One good option when you feel as if Laura has gone for her V-cancel is to back jump heavy kick for Ryu. Because most likely nothing's going to happen to you for doing so, and if Laura guessed in a particular way, you're probably going to get hit for it. That said, please don't take this advice as, hey, back jump when Laura V-cancels, because there are so many levels between the first thing you do and this being a good idea. There's prerequisites, and I'm not going into them now because it's probably not going to help. We are still, after all, discussing bots. And honestly, if you want to make a Ryu bot slightly better, you just put in a longer back walk and possibly a back dash, and he'll probably fix himself up. The question though is what you would actually learn and train against a Ryu bot if you set him up in that way. Most of the time it doesn't really train you to do anything. Ryu players get cleaner and cleaner as they level up, meaning that you get less and less chances to counterattack or do anything in particular against them. And this is, of course, good from the perspective of being able to play a cleaner game and work on your weaknesses and so on, particularly on your offense, but it doesn't translate well to bot work. This is actually primarily because it would be too difficult to input the bot. We know what a Ryu bot at this level is like, we've tested one, but the inputs are so convoluted and heavy, so much is going on, that it seems unreasonable for even a reasonably skilled player in gold or whatever to know that what we have on our website is what they have. And it's one of those things where if your timing is slightly off, you can come to a lot of incorrect conclusions. If you already understood all of the frame data, all of the interactions, all of the hurt boxes and hit boxes to know well enough that everything was fine, you probably didn't need the bot. It is something we have considered for if we ever get the option to let others play on any of the stations that we have to test out. We can definitely prepare and input one of them, a bot that is capable of doing what I'm talking about now. But there are definitely some bots where we really just want to let other people play the versions we have input, rather than putting them on the website for people to put input on their own.
Get ready for action.
That said, with enough disclaimers, and possibly a stream to demonstrate it if we ever do that, we might at least let people see what they're like to understand how to work with it. Because, after all, if you are particularly good at inputs and you've reached a high level but still want to use bots, and not just for testing or warming up, then you probably do have the skill to input it, but you would again also need the skill to verify that what you've got is what you want. And so far we haven't thought of a situation in which Ryu or Ken are characters you really want that for. The parade of Eds continues.
This is the most Eds total I have seen in 6 months. It's kind of impressive.
In the top 20,000 in the world.
Oh, was that V-Trigger too? V-Scope too?
Again?
No, it's not the same person, but this is a totally different matchup with V-Skill too. And I didn't realize it until just today. Okay, we're still in 1.
Once you give Ed V-Skill 2, Ed basically becomes Balrog. Balrog with a projectile. And honestly, the projectile doesn't mean that much. The hard part about fighting Ed with Laura in the clap department is it a good idea to throw clap against the particular player in question? Because Laura can definitely beat a certain type of Ed by just spamming the stand medium kick basically the entire round. It beats so many things Ed does, and it converts into things that she would want to get against the character. It's really effective, but against an Ed that is cautious enough, all that will happen is that the move will get blocked at a very specific spacing that benefits Ed, or whiff punished, which is worse. It doesn't often lead into a whole lot when it's whiff punished, but you all remember Ed's capacity for conversions. And V-Trigger 2 Ed is much more capable of the specific conversions required. So, Omni Rabbit finds himself facing the situation of an Ed whose style appears to imply, hey, I should just spam medium kick now, but who can also convert as soon as V-Trigger is active and make one whiff of those very disruptive. This is one of the things you spend a lot of time learning at higher levels, how to use a tactic until your opponent's counter becomes available to them, and then either use it again just so they use the counter because you have some sort of advantage and want to keep it, and probably have the life to spend on this, or go, nope, I have completely changed gears now, I am cognizant of the fact that this part of the match is over, I don't get to do that anymore as of now, and then find another way to close out the win. But we're not quite there now. Now, the moment of getting there, therefore, is the rough part for Lara. Was Ed's V-Trigger is active. She normally needs her own, but as it's already spent, this is basically going to come down to, can I execute a really tight thing?
You lose.
Edbot does have a variant where the V skill 2 is used, and we have tested that this variant for better or worse does do some pretty good Ed combos, although of course it is random, he will not always happen to choose the input correct to keep his combo going. But he does have them. It's not really particularly helpful because, as with most bots, we don't put a lot of effort into making sure the bot can do combos. Once the bot hits you with a combo, you're dead. You don't learn much. If you got hit in the first place, you should learn not to get hit. Whether or not you get finished off for it, well, if you were fighting at a decent level and worried about that sort of combo, then you've been hit by it. You know that Ed is capable of doing it from the situation that presents itself in the bot. And that is probably enough to remind you, when the bot hits you with this, it means you messed up. Because a player would have killed you. Some people like the idea of the bot being harder, and we suggest to those people find a really good Ed to fight. If you are finding yourself thinking, I wish bots were harder, then you probably are ready for at least some parts of the matchup, although I suppose that is the thing you're trying to at least somewhat get used to or avoid, having to deal with an overwhelming Ed. The rest, you're just gonna have to do within your own head. We know how to make Ed bots slightly more powerful, but at the end of the day, bots still use a randomization system and you cannot force them to finish their combos without making them very susceptible to other things. So just appreciate those few moments where Edbot hits you with a 13 hit something without even using any special V-trigger shenanigans. And know that there will always be some danger. Especially due to the meter settings. Often, that is the purpose of meter settings of particular types on bots, to simply make them dangerous enough to actually defeat you, or they're balanced around the amount of damage they do in particular ways in a certain amount of time, meaning basically before you can get to 10 points. Today it looks like Omni Rabbit is definitely having fun though. There's a lot to unpack in most of these matches. And honestly, seeing your opponent play particularly well can be inspiring in itself.
Is that enough? Oh no. Yeah, no, that's on me.
You lose.
One of those situations with nearly no way out of it.
I was expecting he was just gonna dash up, crouch, speed, and kick chip. That was the real end game, and I got bit by the layer below it.
Omni does, of course, mention the thing that made that almost an unwinnable situation. No V reversal available. No specific way to avoid the projectile. Opponent has enough meter to go for chip kill.
And I don't have enough health to armor.
Yeah, it's just it. There are definitely situations in this game where you have to accept that you've already lost. In fact, it benefits quite a few players to learn the opposite. Some of us get way too caught up in trying to make sure we have won in situations where we have already won. And just need enough time to calm ourselves down and see that the situation is so heavily in our favor that it basically relies on us dropping a combo or our opponent doing something ridiculous. And those two are still situations that you have to accept as a reason why you did not win and a reason why you might not win. But bearing it in mind that relying on those for your victory is way better than, okay, I'm gonna go in and see what I can do now. If you want to win, if that is what you're training that day, then be careful about the feeling that you cannot do it in situations where you have a really big advantage. Of course, this all depends on you being able to understand and analyze what a really big advantage looks like, but that is where experience comes in.
I still can't one punish this man. I'm gonna be training on this bot forever. He's hard.
A favorite training partner of Amara as well. Although she does face the version that I'm fairly sure more often does the V skill and uses the trigger 1. I'm not suggesting that Honda players use V Trigger 1 against Abigail, but I am sort of suggesting that Abigail players use V Trigger 1 when training against Honda bot. If that doesn't make sense, I guess I can see how that would be fair to say. Just try it for a little bit, you might understand.
He just doesn't have hurt boxes. He's so good.
One of our Honda bot's focuses is actually how well he spaces himself for certain things, meaning that his jumps are often better, but not necessarily damaging. Despite the fact that this is a bot you're probably supposed to have gone to after learning to anti-air, we actually have that as a response to how certain bots turn out a lot of the time. We'll accept them even if we have no way to make it more possible for the player to make sure that their jumps are perfect. You can keep on trying to re-input the jump input, it's usually simple, but we'll generally accept a bot that doesn't need a perfect jump input in terms of when the attack buttons come out of that jump. Thankfully, because of most of the ways they're input, it's easier to do.
You are currently ranked in the top
The matchup
20,000.
that is always the most confusing in this game. Not because Dalsim is particularly confusing, but that every Dalsim is incredibly different. Which means that every time you play and fight against Dalsim,
Round one.
you don't know what you're going to get. I have specifically thought in the past, and humor my nonsense, that really, if they absolutely wanted to, they could just make Sheila, I believe it was, ever be almost exactly the same, just like that modder's model, and slightly different frame data than Dalsim, and there would be a set of Dalsim players that would go, yes, this is why I've been waiting for all this time. Just slightly different buffs and nerfs and balance. Because Dalsim is such a widely capable character with all sorts of odd, unique things, that you could functionally have two different buff, nerf versions of Dalsim, same way there are, let's say, if you consider Ken and Ryu to be like that, you could get two Dalsims and it would probably work out for some people. But as we don't have that, Dalsim players get one more bonus to their fighting ability. Specifically, you can never be sure whether any given Dalsim is going to go for stuff or not. Dalsim doesn't spend a lot of time on frame data. If the Dalsim player decides, I think I'm going for this now, or happens to teleport 2 frames later than the last one, you have to put up with different things altogether happening. Which is why being calm about this is really important. Fortunately, with this V-trigger active, it takes a really long time for Dalsim to wear down Laura enough to be in serious danger. Her bigger problem is that he's the character who can zone without the EX Sunset really helping.
The lag is just spiky enough to make this difficult.
You lose.
But that was the right flow, so nothing really to get
Round
too
one.
hung up about it. Just do more of it.
Fight.
Like this.
Laura is one of those characters, similar to Chun-Li, that has to get to Dalsim often by dashing out first and then jumping in a particular space. You have to spend a lot of time learning exactly the space at which you can jump at Dalsim where his anti-airs don't quite work. Or where even if they do work, they don't give the usual resetty style advantage that they normally do. But it's really hard to get yourself into the mental state of Dalsim has hit me with 2 normals and therefore I need to walk backward.
Round two.
I don't think I can win against this person, but we'll see how far I can get. Their defense
It
is
is-
pretty good.
Often the key against this type of player, though, to put on your offense as long as you can, and as soon as pushed back to a place where you no longer have offense, particularly after any situation in which you've blocked Dalsim's stand medium kick, but his ankle was intercepted with your character's body, if you learn to recognize that point, you can backdash to avoid the next normal that Dalsim has, and with some amount of delay, jump forward again. The main thing this does is actually just add stress to the Dalsim player.
Final round.
Most of them don't want to take to the air in that situation, which is the answer to float backwards and then do the jumping medium punch, whichever the lateral one is, I always forget. those that do this are often the type you can actually advance on, so you can learn a little bit about it quite quickly.
Ah. I messed up like 5 different things there. And that was the wrong timing, so... Because really what I needed to do is, this is the kind of Dawson that actually does like hitting multiple medium buttons. And so you block the first one, block the second one, and like the 5th one, because he wants to keep hitting, the EX armor will work. But I'm just not there with the armor right now. So, it happens. I probably could have jumped more too. A lot of things went wrong. It's a hard matchup. Though I guess the same thing is something the Dawson player could say, so I guess it's even.
Get ready for action.
The stream is of course mostly for archive purposes. Please remember that if you are still looking for Street Fighter action, Capcom Fighters is streaming things right now, probably top 8 of the final parts of the top 8.
In the top 20,000.
I thought top 8 was tomorrow.
The world.
Is it? Oh wait,
because
no, it's
usually they split they do the top 16 on Saturday and the top 8 on Sunday.
well, but I mean, we're proceeding into top 8.
Oh, then yeah.
Round 1. Fight.
But of course, we therefore stream now for those people who don't really always feel like they know what's going on in really high level play, but still want to do or watch something. And of course, as noted, for archive purposes. So we're back to our hey, I should spam stand medium kick style ed. With the main difficulty being that this player is good enough to not have that lead to Laura having a large enough life lead to get away with anything. Because a lot of the time that is what you're counting on. The idea that your opponent cannot kill you fast enough with the resources even once they've got them. Meaning, you play the neutral part really well until they get V-trigger, live through their V-trigger, and then finish winning the match.
Round 2. Fight.
A common tactic against a lot of Urians.
That's weird. The Psycho Spark has enough block stun to be really plus on meaty, but it also makes it extremely difficult to actually reversal it on time. So he just gets the jab.
You lose.
Neat.
And that's why you have to jump back.
Yep.
Because the jab's timing will be such that you will get air reset, and Ed doesn't has no terrifying low height air resets. If anything, he has more trouble confirming off of that sort of thing than basically anyone else in the game.
Round 1.
Characters with good air resets often have a light low that combos into something quickly. Or at least a relatively fast one. Ed's crouch medium kick is not the greatest, and his crouch light kick leads into basically nothing, so what Ed gets out of that situation is more pressure, which you can then view reversal out if you really wanted to.
I should practice that. The going into the elbow. Oh, damn it. Yeah, I'm dead.
willingness to spend the meter to get it too.
Round 2.
It's worth it. Because I have full bar. If I guess right on super, that's him dead, so pretty good choice. And I'm not doing nearly as much with meter as he is, so. Oh. Man, this guy always blocks Ion Wake Up. That's fascinating.
Ed's lack of fear of slow projectile characters comes out of a lot of practice, almost all of the time.
Oh, I missed the combo. Why didn't it go into EX Clap? That was so weird. It's going better than last time, though. There's that. But yeah, if I need to practice anything against Ed specifically, it's that I can just forward elbow into him holding the punch. I don't need V meter for that, so that's really interesting. Because there's certain Eds that barely ever use the regular uncharged heavy punch, so it's worth it. Even just to hit him once, it's worth it. And that bot does that enough that I can just turn that on, so I should probably do that.
Our parade of Eds has slightly lessened the types of things we got to talk about because, as you can note, I did not have nothing to say about Dalsim Bot because Dalsim Bot is itself.
Time for battle.
Dalsim Bot is hard enough to understand that there would be an entire dissertation just to understand what to do to have inputs that weighed any root or anything. Although we have hoped to increase the amount of well-timed drills that he uses. And possibly to find better ways to get him to use his V trigger too, as the current version basically has no good functions for that.
That's interesting. Okay. So if I cancel into the light elbow whenever he's doing V trigger 2, it might just hit the armor. I have no idea how useful that is. Probably useful in that situation, actually, when I'm just doing frame traps and he just does the armor to get out of it. That. God, that's unsettling.
Well, that one's slowing down after all.
Okay, the reversal timing for the headbutts isn't that different from each other. Oof. No? Okay. I almost hit that. That would have been... That would have been variable. I don't quite understand what makes this game declare 1 bar, but since it's based on ping timings, my guess is that is somebody with a really drastically unstable connection. Okay.
Probably means that we're coming to the end of the stream. Normally we will only stream, regardless of what we're doing, for around 90 minutes. Just a convenient time block to fit into, and the length of stream that people who tend to randomly watch content like this, or who aren't random at all, will seek. So if you're used to us having 90-minute or 2-hour content to fit into some time block that you have set aside for it, we're probably going to be sticking more or less to that today, but it looks like, for whatever reason, we're not getting the confirmations from the other side. Perhaps the numbers are not showing the same to the opponents.
You know what? I'll take it. Let's see. Okay. One match. Let's hope. Let's not make any specific hope, actually. Let's see what it is. Is that the same guy? If it is, that's actually pretty good. I think that's fine to end on. Yeah, it is. Neat.
So, this is exactly the sort of shortfall situation we were talking about before. If you know you can't change your mindset, then you go into the match with the perspective of changing your behavior from the onset.
Round 1.
Neutral jumping Dalsim can sometimes be helpful, but it's not usually as useful as back jumping, because the neutral jump puts you back in the same situation where Dalsim is going to be ready to anti-air. The back jump puts you in a situation where Dalsim is not precisely ready to anti-air, but a lot of that depends on your defense. Depending on the Dalsim player, they may take your back jump as an opportunity for them to do something. What we suggest actually is to train your defense on Dalsim against a level 7 CPU, because CPU Dalsim is one of the few characters where reading your inputs doesn't really matter. Most of what Dalsim does is a reaction to Dalsim things. And you can learn that from the CPU well enough.
Good. See, usually I lose these rounds because I saw the game-winning moment, dropped the combo, and died, but it worked out. Worked out.
Fight.
That's done? Not quite. And with the momentum, you just get it.
Because once again, Laura does not respect life leads, even when she doesn't actually have one. This is particularly because you have to make a strong decision about what you think the Laura player wants at the moment of your wake up. Most situations in which you don't do this lead to really bad things happening, mostly because
Round 1.
many characters have good ways out of these situations, but they would have to commit to doing them really hard, and most of us are not conditioned to commit really hard to things. Lara is a character who forces this. When you have decided, I think Lara is going to do this, just go full in on the read, because the same thing applies. Lara has so many ways to catch you, to deal with all your potential escapes, that your situation doesn't improve by you going, let me play it safe.
Yeah, that's fair. I failed a bunch of armors, actually, so this is the expected result of not being able to get out of it. Oh, nice one. Yep. That is the perfect V-reversal. You can't get better than that.
Round 2.
Neat.
Fight.
Similarly, Lara faces the same situation when facing a very aggressive, or rather, a very compressed Dalsim. And I say compressed because Dalsim isn't really, strictly speaking, aggressive, as able to move around you and compress the same things he was planning to do anyway into a shorter time frame. This often appears as, oh, Dalsim is attacking more. Dalsim is always attacking. Even when Dalsim is not hitting buttons, he's technically attacking you because he's waiting for you to do something so he can teleport. Fortunately, for Army Rabbit, raw activation is sufficient for certain things.
You lose.
I think Dawson is one of the characters where if you have, you know, a really unstable connection, it just plays into his game plan, because it's just he's already weird. If you see another weird movement, it just looks like an intentional mix-up, and that's kind of messed up.
Round one.
The easiest way to deal with this against most Dalsim players is to forward dash. When it's laggy, you don't necessarily have to fight with the intention of using the lag to your advantage, but countering the lag has most to do with keeping moving long enough that your opponent can't end up using it for themselves without meaning to.
Got it. Okay, fair.
Another large part of the reason why we suggest retreating and jumping back in those situations is because Dalsim spends a lot of time looking for when you're going to come at him, and is technically more stressful when you don't.
Okay, he can react to that.
Our
But he can't
tendency to
react to
want to do something against opposing characters who have a lot of control is basically the way Dalsim players defeat most players. They know that we want to do something. So we do, and then they respond, and then we die. Dalsimbot does have that built into it. A very strong tendency to have just a long enough of a pause in actions that an inexperienced player who is getting used to it thinks, okay, he hasn't done anything for a bit, I guess I'm doing my stuff now, and will get beat up because it's not true.
It ain't a command grab, but I don't know if that would have been enough. I think he's prepared enough for the post-command grab state that it wouldn't have gotten a kill. That was just good. He's just good. And I need to activate earlier. I keep not activating or using V-reversal in times where it doesn't actually help that much. Because just having it up makes him less willing to do a lot of the actually scary things that Dalsim can do in terms of deleting my health. And if he doesn't feel able to teleport, if he doesn't feel able to drill, I'm just chilling. But I think that's a pretty good one to end on.
Well then, if you want to watch more content, you can find our YouTube channel. It's basically all 2MK. And we'll see more Street Fighter action on Monday with our Mishmashing Battle Lounge. This has been Rillian along with OmniRabbit for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.